This was not just another gala, it was a battlefield in disguise. When a liberal journalist aimed to publicly humiliate Melania Trump with sharp-edged questions, no one anticipated the twist. In front of a room full of power players and millions watching live, it wasn't her husband or security who stepped in. It was Barron Trump. And what happened next would shatter the journalist's credibility and send shockwaves across the internet. But how did a teenager manage to take control of the room and dismantle his opponent's argument with surgical precision? Keep watching, because this clash was unlike anything you've ever seen. The night glittered with opulence, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden glows across the grand hall while guests in designer attire mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging polite smiles. It was one of those evenings, meant to reflect cohesion and strength, a showcase of the elite, at their finest. But for a man lost amidst the sea of people, this was not a night of jubilation, it was an opportunity. Sharp-tongued and with headlines to match, this journalist had but one ambition that night: to destroy the aura of Melania Trump. Subtle, his plan wasn't. For weeks, he had rehearsed his questions, each one chiseled like a weapon. He knew this was the moment opponent humiliated by him in such a way that the headlines would run for days. As the program gradually unwrapped, tension was almost not there. The Trump family sat at a table near the stage, commanding attention without words. Melania, in an elegant yet understated gown, exuded poise as she exchanged smiles with other guests. The journalist sat at his table, quietly gazing at his target and waiting for his time. Not until the host opened the floor to questions did the journalist get his opportunity. Smiling as if he would rather kiss her than confront her, he stood up and took the microphone. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his voice steady but laced with an unmistakable edge, "many people have questioned your role as First Lady, suggesting it was largely ceremonial. How do you respond to critics who say you lacked any real accomplishments?" The room fell silent. The polite, murmured conversations disappeared, replaced by a heavy hush. Every pair of eyes was now upon Melania. And for a moment, she said nothing. Her expression betrayed nothing, gave nothing away. When she finally spoke, her voice came out calm and measured. "As First Lady, my focus was on initiatives that improved the lives of children. I believe that actions speak louder than words, and my best campaign." The journalist cut her off mid-sentence, now with a more aggressive tone. "Yes, but isn't it true that most of your initiatives were criticized for being superficial? Some would say they were more about optics than impact." The audience gave a slight murmur of disquiet, because this was no longer a question, but an attack. Melania did not bat an eyelid, the room felt it rise. It was because of the crowd's silence that the emboldened journalist continued. "And what about the allegations that much of the funding for your projects came from donors seeking political favor? Isn't it fair to say your role was more about symbolism than substance?" With every word, the air in the room grew heavier. Melania opened her mouth to respond, but before she could utter a word, another voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," the voice said, calm but firm. Heads turned toward the source. It was Barron Trump, rising from his seat. 15-year-old Barron carried himself with a confidence way beyond his years. As he walked forward to the stage, focused and unfazed, the room's gaze shifted as one. In the space of a few seconds, the whole mood had changed. And he would? For a second, the journalist's smirk wavered as Barron leaned for the microphone. The audience held its collective breath. It was a setup for the unlikeliest confrontation. When one seasoned journalist thought he could bully Melania Trump, he never imagined her teenage son would take the stage and obliterate him. Barron Trump didn't just defend his mother, he exposed the hypocrisy of the journalist, leaving the entire room stunned. How did this young man turn this hostile ambush into a masterclass in composure and intelligence? You won't believe the facts he revealed and the devastating blow he delivered. The moment Barron Trump took to the stage, the grand hall changed completely. What was to be an underhanded attack on his mother turned into something very different. Standing tall, the teenager adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the journalist. Without a hint of hesitation, without nerves, he addressed the audience, who by now was leaning forward in their chairs, feeling that something remarkable was about to take place. "With all due respect," Barron said calmly but firmly, "your questions insinuate that my mother has done nothing. Allow me to clear up some of those points for you." Taken aback by the young man's aplomb, the journalist was hardly able to hold his smirk. He had been prepared for aggression or silence. This, though. Barron went on, the pitch of his voice steady, deliberate. The Be Best initiative wasn't just a campaign. It funded anti-bullying programs that reached over 500 schools nationwide. It provided resources to combat opioid addiction in communities that desperately needed help. These are not symbolic actions, they are measurable impacts. He paused, letting the words sink in. The audience's silence was deafening. Even those who might have shared the journalist's skepticism couldn't ignore the conviction in Barron's voice. But he wasn't done. "Since you brought up funding," he said, turning the journalist's weapon back on him, "perhaps you'd like to explain the inconsistencies in your reporting on similar programs. For example, your article last year about government grants to education initiatives conveniently omitted key data that contradicted your narrative." A murmur of assent rumbled through the crowd. This wasn't a defense. It was a counterattack. The journalist's poise broke, his smug smile now a grimace. Barron pressed his advantage. "Criticism is important, but it should be honest and constructive. When you distort facts to serve your agenda, you don't just undermine the truth, you undermine the trust of the people who depend on your reporting." The tension in the room was palpable. The journalist's face turned pale as he fumbled for a response. But Barron had already moved on, addressing the audience directly. "My mother has never claimed to be perfect. She's never sought recognition for her work. But I've seen firsthand how much she cares about making a difference, even when it goes unnoticed. That deserves respect, not baseless attacks." The hall began to ring with applause. Barron's words not only had taken the wind out of the sails of the journalists but had reversed the whole mood of the evening. An ambush had been turned into a triumph. The clapping died down as Barron swung around to face the journalist again. "When you criticize somebody," he said, "let your own house be in order first." The flustered journalist looked away and immediately passed the microphone to his neighbor. The audience followed him with their gaze as he sank into his seat, his poise broken. Barron stepped away from the microphone to return to his seat beside his mother. Melania placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her eyes were quiet and proud. Still in shock, the audience continued to murmur to one another in hushed tones. At that moment, it became crystal clear. Barron Trump had flipped the switch big time, and no one present in the room was going to remember that for quite a while. This wasn't a rebuttal. This was a complete and utter annihilating. Barron Trump didn't save his mother and stop there. He let out the journalist's dirty laundry in front of the world. Then, the audience watched as the teenager brought out some damning evidence to turn the tables completely. The smirk was gone, replaced by panic in the journalist. How Barron revealed this, and what transpired afterward, left everybody speechless. The room was still buzzing from Barron's commanding response, but no one was prepared for what came next. Standing at the microphone, the teenager looked directly at the journalist, his gaze steady and unyielding. "You've raised questions about integrity and transparency," Barron began, his voice calm but edged with resolve. "So let's talk about that." The journalist tensed, his confidence fissuring right before one's eyes. He shifted in his seat as Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It seems only fair," Barron continued, "to address the credibility of the person asking these questions." The audience's collective breath caught. This was no longer a mere defense. It was an exposé. "In your recent article on political transparency," Barron said, unfolding the paper, "you accused public figures of hiding behind donor networks. Yet records show that you personally accepted payments from organizations known for spreading disinformation. Would you like to comment on that?" The journalist's face turned ashen. A ripple of gasps moved through the audience. The carefully constructed persona head brought to this event was unraveling before their eyes. Barron pressed on, undeterred. "Furthermore, your past work on healthcare policy has included data that was later proven to be debunked." Your retraction statement received less than 1/10 of the visibility your original report had. Isn't it hypocritical to criticize others for lack of accountability when your own record is anything but clean? The room erupted into murmurs. The journalist's attempts to maintain his composure were failing. Beads of sweat glistened on his brow as he fumbled for words, but Barron wasn't done. "It's easy to sit behind a keyboard and point fingers," Barron said, his tone cutting but controlled. "But accountability applies to everyone. If you're going to question my mother's integrity, be prepared to answer for your own actions." The silence that followed was deafening. The audience stared at the journalist, who now looked like a man cornered. Barron's words hung in the air, undeniable and unforgiving. A moment of frozen stillness passed, and then he sprang to his feet, muttered something under his breath, and headed briskly toward the exit. The room watched in stunned silence as he went out, all earlier bravado replaced by humiliation. As Barron stepped back from the microphone, the audience erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a standing ovation. Guests rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the grand hall. The teenager returned to his seat beside his mother, who greeted him with a quiet, proud smile. It had turned out to be one of those nights none of them would ever forget. An evening that had started off as an attempt to discredit Melania Trump had somehow turned completely around and ripped the mask off her critic instead. And she had her 15-year-old son to thank for a mannered, articulate, poised, and clear in a way that spoke volumes for fairness. He thought this would have ended the humiliation, but little did he know that a storm had just been unleashed by Barron Trump. Overnight, it went viral, and debates sprouted across media. Critics turned on the journalist, and his once solid reputation started to crumble. But here came the real twist when an unexpected ally stepped in to defend Barron. It wasn't a story, it was a reckoning nobody saw coming. As the applause in the grand hall died down, the world outside was just waking up to the firestorm that had erupted. Clips of Barron's calm yet devastating takedown of the journalist began circulating on social media within minutes. The hashtags #BarronTrump and #JournalistExposed trended globally by morning. News outlets scrambled to cover the confrontation, with some praising Barron's composure and others questioning the journalist's intentions. By midday, even the journalist's own network issued a tepid statement dissociating itself from his actions at the event. Carefully chosen words, but the implication was not really in doubt. The fires of damage control had been lit. Behind the scenes, anonymous sources spoke of increasing tensions between the journalist and many colleagues who felt that his approach was a reckless misstep. Meanwhile, the Trump family kept silent and refused to give in to the chaos publicly. But Barron's actions spoke louder than any statement. His defense of his mother and the exposing of the journalist's hypocrisy became a symbol of integrity and strength. And then came the unexpected twist. A figure within the media world, who had also been one of the consistent critics of the Trump family, issued a statement to defend Barron publicly. While I may disagree with the politics of the Trump family, they wrote, what Barron demonstrated was poise, intelligence, and a respect for truth that transcends partisan divides. His ability to articulate his points with such clarity at his age is something we should all acknowledge. The statement added fuel to the fire. Debate raged on television panels, podcasts, and online forums. Was the journalist's downfall justified? Did Barron's performance signal a new chapter for the Trump family's public image? Speculation swirled, and the media frenzy showed no signs of slowing down. The aftermath for the journalist was not only immediate but also merciless. Past controversies revisited him as critics dug deep into his history, digging up numerous instances of questionable reporting and ethical lapses. A reputation once considered untouchable crumbled in the face of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Barron emerged as the unlikely hero. Anchors couldn't get over how well-adjusted he was, while social media platforms were filled with people creating memes and flooding their timelines in support of him. Even the most ardent critics of the Trump family found themselves impressed by the teenager's ability to command a room and deliver such a measured yet powerful rebuttal. As the week wore on, the ripples of that event spread from the media into schools, using the confrontation as a teaching moment about how to stand up for one's beliefs with facts and respect. Discussions about journalistic ethics gained momentum, with calls for accountability in the field. And through it all, Barron said nothing. No interviews, no social media posts. It only added to the intrigue, leaving the public to guess what the future might hold for the teenager who had, in one evening, shifted the narrative in a way no one expected. The journalist's career would never recover, however. Under increasing pressure, he issued a public apology, a carefully worded statement that did little to repair the damage. His resignation from the network followed shortly after, a quiet end to what had once been a prominent career. The moment went viral, but it was more than an incident, a case study in how truth, courage, and composure can take down even the most calculated of attacks. To Barron Trump, it was a defining moment that sealed his place, not only as a defender of his mother but also as a young man not afraid to stand up for what he believed in. And for the audience, it begged one question: was this the beginning of Barron's rise, or was this a rare glimpse of a quiet force who let his actions do more talking? It was a story that didn't end with the resignation. Instead, it spiraled into something much greater. As the Barron Trump confrontation continued to make headlines, it started reimagining accountability, ethics, and even the dynamics of power emanating from the younger generation. It went from being a viral moment to becoming a cultural phenomenon, its ripples touching even the very pinnacle of media and politics. Then came the shock. Finally, the silence of Barron was broken, and what he said shook the very foundations of all that one had thought to be true. The viral clash between Barron Trump and the journalist had already caused an earthquake in the media landscape, but its aftereffects were only just beginning to be felt. In the days following the event, the impact spread much farther than newsrooms or social media. Politicians, educators, and even global leaders weighed in, each with a different takeaway from the confrontation. Perhaps even more unexpected was a revelation that came from the international leader regarding Barron's composure. At an age of division, his maturity and respect for truth is an example to young people everywhere, he said in a televised address. It was unsolicited, adding all the more to debate over what lasting ramifications the moment might have. Meanwhile, schools around the country seized on the moment to take the confrontation into classrooms, using it as a teaching point about media literacy, ethical reporting, and the art of respectful dialogue. Students debated whether the approach by Barron was evidence of a new era of youth leadership or an exceptional moment from an exceptional individual. But as the public gushed over Barron's composure, the journalist's world continued to implode. Investigative stories proliferated, peeling back layers on his career. It was quickly established that the journalist had taken more shortcuts and sullied more ethical lines than anyone suspected. Past colleagues stepped forward with anecdotes of manipulation and questionable practices. What once seemed the result of an unfortunate lapse in judgment now seemed part of a disturbing pattern. Meanwhile, the journalist's detractors were not the only ones raising such a din. A small yet vocal fraction came out in his support, framing his case as an example of cancel culture gone too far. Panels were called for, opinion pieces were written, and #free speech debates started trending on Twitter. The confrontation had transcended its original context, turning into a lightning rod for bigger debates in society. The Trump family said nothing as mania took hold. But it was Barron in particular who became the most enigmatic, his invisibility only making him more intriguing. Pundits pontificated on what the future might hold for him. Would he step further into or away from the public eye? Was this his singular moment, or the prelude to a larger role on the world stage? Then, a week after the incident, Barron did speak up. In a concise but powerful social media statement, he talked about what had happened at the gala. Standing up for what is right should never be controversial, he said. I acted not as a Trump, but as someone who values truth and respect. This isn't about sides. It's about principles. The post immediately went viral, gaining millions of likes and shares within hours. It was also highly praised for its clarity and maturity, reinforcing the public's perception of Barron as a thoughtful and principled young man. Yet it also reignited the debates, with critics dissecting every word in search of hidden agendas or political undertones. It was a resignation that had at first appeared to be the climax of the story, but now felt like a footnote in a very different story. The confrontation had become a cultural reference, a moment that made many rethink their assumptions about age and accountability, and about a new play of power in public life. As the dust began to settle, one thing was clear: this was not just a story about a journalist, or a teenage son defending his mother. It was a moment that revealed the cracks in the system and the unexpected strength of those willing to challenge it. For better or worse, the confrontation had set a new standard, one that the world would be reckoning with for years to come.